International relations always shifting, aren't they?
Yeah.
And right now, Africa's seeing some really big changes, especially around France and its former colonies.
That's right. Things are definitely in flux.
So for you listening, if you want to get a solid grasp on these dynamics, without digging through tons of reports, that's what we're doing today, taking that deep dive.
We're asking, essentially, is this the end of an era for French influence there? What's really driving all this change?
Exactly. We're looking at why relationships seem so strained, particularly these calls for French troops to leave.
And we've pulled together news reports, some expert analysis, trying to get different angles on this.
Yeah, think of it as your shortcut to understanding a pretty complex geopolitical picture. Our mission today, unpack why this big reset in relations seems to be faltering.
We need to look at the key events, the buildup, and maybe where things are going.
Okay, let's get into it. So 7 years back, Macron comes in, talking about a fresh start, a reset for France-AFTA relations.
Yeah, the idea was definitely to move past some of the, let's say, historical baggage, the more paternalistic stuff.
Seemed positive at first.
There was some initial optimism, yes. But fast forward to now, well, it's a different story.
We're seeing more and more West African countries asking French troops to pack up and leave.
It's quite a list now. You've got Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Gabon, and now Senegal, Chad, Côte d'Ivoire too. That's 7 former colonies just in recent months changing their tune on cooperation with France.
And it's not just minor adjustments, is it?
Yeah.
Some are demanding a total withdrawal.
Exactly. A complete exit of French forces.
Yeah.
Well, that's not just a diplomatic shuffle. It's a major statement about wanting a fundamentally different relationship.
Which sort of leads us to Macron's own words, his comments to ambassadors, criticizing what he called ingratitude.
Particularly regarding interventions like the one in the Sahel back in 2013. He seemed to suggest they wouldn't even be sovereign nations without France.
And predictably, that didn't go down well.
Not at all. The reactions were strong. Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, he called it an insult, said he felt dehumanized.
Strong words.
Very. And then you had Senegal's Prime Minister, Ousmane Sonko. He brought up the history, reminding Macron about African soldiers fighting for France in World War II.
Saying France's existence today is partly thanks to them.
Precisely. His point was clear. This relationship has deep roots, and it cuts both ways. It taps into that long-standing feeling of, domination and not being heard. That history is really fueling things now.
Absolutely. Then things get even messier with the troop withdrawal claims, right? Macron said the pullouts from Chad and Senegal were negotiated.
And leaders in both countries immediately came out and said, no, that's not accurate. Public denials.
And these aren't minor players, Chad and Senegal. They've been key French allies for a long time.
For decades. So for them to publicly contradict the French president like that, it really highlights how deep the tensions are, suggests a serious breakdown in trust.
Right. A lack of communication, maybe?
Or at least a serious disconnect. It's significant.
So what's really behind all this anti-French feeling? It's clearly more than just these recent spats.
Oh, definitely. Experts point to deeper roots. Ndongo Sambasila, the economist, talks about a history of domination, arrogance, and indifference.
Decades of it.
Yeah. He argues this resentment's been simmering for years. A feeling that French policies have often been exploitative, dismissive, prioritizing French interests.
And the focus on military solutions seems to have backfired.
Hugely, in terms of public perception. It's seen by many as part of that pattern of interference.
There was also a point made about Macron's communication style, wasn't there?
Yes, Thierry Vercoulon noted Macron's tendency to speak his mind publicly.
Which in the age of social media
Gets amplified instantly. He can turn a comment into a major diplomatic incident very quickly. It shows how leaders' words, even off-the-cuff remarks, can escalate things fast now. A new challenge, really.
Okay, but what about the actual impact of these withdrawals? Does pulling troops out actually help or hinder the situation on the ground, say, in Mali?
That's a really critical question. Roland Marshall looked at Mali specifically, and his assessment was pretty blunt.
What did he find?
He said the security situation got significantly worse after the French mission left, called it a failure, in all honesty.
So the intervention wasn't working perfectly, but the withdrawal made things worse.
That seems to be Marshall's conclusion for Mali, yes. It underlines how complex these security situations are and maybe the limits of external military fixes.
And someone else suggested France maybe didn't invest enough elsewhere. beyond the military.
Right, that was Jules Holder. His point was that maybe unlike Britain, France didn't put enough focus on building, economic and cultural ties post-independence.
So that lack of broader connection could feed into this feeling of alienation.
It certainly could contribute, yeah. If the relationship feels primarily military or purely transactional, it might lack that deeper foundation.
It does seem like France is starting to react, though, at least economically.
There are signs of that. With relations souring in some Francophone countries, you see this pivot.
Right.
More effort towards building economic links with Anglophone nations like Nigeria.
English-speaking nations, yeah.
Yeah.
And also Morocco, Angola.
Exactly. A strategic shift, looking for more stable or perhaps more promising economic partnerships elsewhere on the continent.
So, looking ahead, what's the future hold for these France-Africa relationships? What are the experts thinking?
Oh, Jonathan Gouffard thinks France can't just walk away entirely. But the military footprint likely has to shrink significantly. He even felt the situation with Chad might be past the point of repair.
Wow. And Antoine Glazer.
He argued that the whole model of relying on security pacts is just outdated. He basically said France has been too present, almost replacing African armies instead of supporting them.
Which doesn't build local capacity.
Not in the long run, no. It doesn't foster that sense of ownership or sustainable security.
Vercalant seemed worried too, right? That France wasn't truly demilitarizing the relationship.
Yeah, he raised concerns that instead of stepping back militarily, France might just be trying a new kind of military partnership, which he sees as politically risky.
And Marshall warned about missing an opportunity.
Yes, particularly as some Sahel states might transition back to civilian rule. He worries France could miss the boat on building a genuinely more respectful, more peaceful relationship if it doesn't fundamentally change its approach now.
So the consensus seems to be less military, more something else.
Pretty much. A fundamental rethink is needed, more emphasis on partnership, economic ties, cultural exchange, less on military intervention as the primary tool.
Okay, so wrapping this up, that reset we talked about seems to have hit a major wall.
Definitely faltering.
These calls for troops to leave are loud, fueled by history, perceived slights, recent diplomatic blunders,
A complex mix, for sure.
and France is shifting its economic focus in response. The future. Uncertain, but a less military-centric approach seems essential according to the experts. For you listening, it really highlights these big shifts in global influence.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought to leave you with. What does all this tell us about post-colonial dynamics today, about the agency nations have in the 21st century?
And what are the knock-on effects for stability in the region, for global power balances?
Exactly. Lots to think about there, maybe digging a bit more into that historical context we touched on. It's crucial for understanding what's happening now.